take a seat. Guys, it would be really great. Can you all take a seat?
Dude, you're so bad.
Guys, take a seat, please. You're kind of all standing. Can you, like, sit in a seat?
Oh my gosh.
Guys.
Hey guys, welcome back. We have some announcements before our talk and singing this morning. So for our announcements, we have Easter is this Sunday, so happy Easter, guys. There is still going to be a service on Sunday morning, but it's at 8:30 and on YouTube Live, as it has been the last couple weeks. So tune into that and watch the service. Also, don't forget about the Zoom meetings. We're going to be doing those every week. So high schoolers will do 3 o'clock on Mondays, and middle schoolers 3 o'clock on Tuesdays. That's all the announcements. Oh wait, no, that's not all the announcements we have. We have the prayer prompt, the Instagram poll, and the Instagram question of the day every day. And so make sure you guys do those. And yeah, let's turn it over to Reebok for music.
Hey guys, I've really missed getting to worship with you all. It's such a privilege to get together and sing on Wednesday nights. But the good news is we don't have to be in the same room to worship the Lord. So I am going to play a song, one of our favorites from the last year or so. So I just encourage you to go ahead and sing along with me, because it doesn't matter if you're the only one in your house singing or not, you're still singing to the Lord, and He just loves to hear your voice. as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All the children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. So wide. All you heavens, let the praise go up as the walls come down. All creation, everything with breath, repeat the sound. All these children, clean hands, pure hearts, good grace, good God. His name is Jesus. Jesus, our redemption, our salvation is in His blood. Jesus, light of heaven, friend forever, His kingdom come.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, could I get Winston to hand out the Bibles? I don't need one, Winston. Thank you, Winston, for doing that. So, we're back today. We're going to do things a little bit differently, or talk about things that are maybe a little bit different today. So, a lot of times I think we as Christians get joy and happiness confused. So, when we run through the fruit of the Spirit, we get love and then joy, and our mind immediately goes to happiness. So, today, I want to really dig into that a little bit, how we can be good Christians and not necessarily be happy, but we can still be joyful. And that gets overlooked a lot. So we're looking at being sorrowful or lamenting. So I know for some of you, this time is actually just boring, right? It's not really sad, it's just really boring. It's kind of a bummer. You'd prefer to see your friends, but you don't, and you don't mind staying up just a little bit later. You probably don't have as much schoolwork to do, so you don't really mind everything that's going on. But I know some of you are actually really sad, and that's okay. It's okay to be sad that you missed an entire soccer season, or a band competition, or like an awesome spring break trip that you had lined up. It's okay to be super upset that you missed prom, or that you'll probably miss graduation. It's fine that you're really grieving not getting to see your friends right now, especially since it was maybe the last time you guys were all going to be together for a while, if they're going off to college or you're going off to college. And I just wanted to say it's okay that you're sad. And I want to encourage you that the Christian thing isn't to be stoic and to pretend like none of this matters, but instead I would encourage you to really lean into your sorrow and really examine it and really be kind of okay with being sad for a season, but still trusting that the Lord is working. So the Bible has an entire genre of psalms intended for people to sing when they're sorrowful, right? There's even an entire book of the Old Testament called Lamentations, which, as you can probably tell, is for people that are lamenting. That means being sad. So that's obviously about the people of Judah lamenting over their city being destroyed and then being exiled. But I think it works for every time Christians are sad. We can still get stuff from the book of Lamentations and the Psalms of Lament. So tonight, we're not looking at a happy psalm. We're looking at one of those Psalms of Lament. And so that's Psalm 80. So if you want to go ahead and turn there and read it, you can pause the video. That'd be great. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, probably.
You should leave.
Now that you guys are there, we're going to take a look at some key factors in Psalms of Lament. So there's three things that I really want to focus in on that you're going to find across these Psalms. So the first one is that the people always cry out to God, and they cry out to God as they are. So they don't have to get ready and make it pretty and make it sound good. They call out to God, and they're really sad,
and they're hurting, and you can tell, right? So God already knows their hearts and their circumstances and their lives, so they don't need to clean it up before they go to God to cry and to be sorrowful. So that's the first thing we're looking at. The second one is that they always ask for help. So it's not just a complain fest, right? They don't just complain about things and then kind of move on with their life. They ask God for help. They ask for relief. They ask for God to provide for their needs. Sometimes that's protection. Sometimes that's provision, right? But they always ask God to provide for them. And then finally, the third characteristic that we're looking at is that they respond with trust and praise. So they often reiterate different aspects of God's character. So maybe his might, or his holiness, or his love, or his power. They also remember God's help to them from the past. And that'll be very obvious in this psalm. And eventually they're going to end with praise and adoration. So it's important for us to remember that they didn't go through all three of these things, the crying out to God, the asking for help, and then the resulting worship, all in the time it takes us to read a single psalm. They wrestled with these feelings and they struggled for a long time before they wrote the psalm. So we need to not necessarily expect we'll go from just like ugly crying out to God, to worshiping God in the 45 seconds it takes us to read the psalm. We need to really embrace it and wrestle with these thoughts and these feelings. So these are a great way for us to respond, but let's look at how Psalm 80 specifically does this. All right, so this psalm is going to gradually pick up steam. So the psalmist is going to gradually go into more detail about his pain and his suffering, but then simultaneously, at the same time, he'll begin to praise God more and more deeply. So let's take a look at how that happens. So things start out pretty slowly in verses 1 and 2. God is the shepherd, right? God, come save us. That's kind of it, right? It doesn't sound like too big of a deal. But then verse 3, the psalmist says, "Restore us, O God, let your face shine that we may be saved." So the question for you guys is, do you see that line repeated anywhere else? So you probably do, right? But it changes a little bit. How does that line change, and why do you think it's important that it changes? Or do you think it's important at all? You don't have to answer this one. It is at the end. And there's also another one. It's also in the middle. Yeah, good job. All right, so now the imagery really starts picking up. So after verse 3. So God is he's angry with the prayers of his people. Right? He basically gives them tears instead of food and drink. So their sorrow is overwhelming. Can you imagine how many tears it would take to have the same mass as like a sandwich or something? Like, that's a ton of tears, right? They're crying really hard. And then to top it off, while they're crying, right, while they're bawling their eyes out, while they have little snot bubbles coming down, their enemies are standing right next to them, laughing at their misfortune. Not just having a good old time, but actually laughing at them because they're crying. This makes them mad, obviously. They're frustrated, they're upset. And then the psalmist repeats the cry for help that we looked at in verse 3. But he tweaks it just a little bit. He says, "Restore us, O God of hosts." So that hosts, that God of hosts, is a military term. So if you're the God of the multitude, or God of many, that would mean you're powerful and you're mighty, right? You're in charge, and you're in effect, they're saying something that's even more worshipful than they said the first time. Because you don't see any scrawny, puny guys leading the army, right? It's always guys that are in control. So God is in control of the biggest army. So he's in control. All right. So now the psalmist is going to go into a time of recounting how God raised Israel up. So note that the Lord is the one doing all the work here. So some of you might have planted a garden before, and it can be really tough work. But imagine how hard it would be for a tomato plant to do all that work. Right, it couldn't. Right, Bob the tomato in real life, just a regular tomato, couldn't clear the ground and then dig the hole and then put, I guess, himself in the hole and then cover himself up and water him, right? A tomato could never do that himself. They had to have a human, right? And just like we, or Israel, could never plant themselves and grow themselves into a mighty nation, they needed God to do that for them. And that's what the psalmist is getting at here, that God is the one that established Israel. God didn't just make Israel your average vine, right? Like your run-of-the-mill vine, whatever that looks like. He made them huge, right? So big that they covered the mountains, right? So mighty that they spread out all the way to the sea. So the psalmist goes on to recount these good times, but that leads into a question in verse 12. And that question is why? Why would God build Israel up just to break them down? Why would he make it so that the boars, which are like pigs, which were considered unclean, why would God use these unclean animals to not only come near his chosen people, but even to ravage and to destroy his chosen people? Why would God do all of that work to establish Israel and now just take it away? Why would God give a good gift and then take it away? And that's something that's really interesting about Psalm 80, is that that question is never fully answered. The psalmist never answers that question. We never get a definitive answer as to why God does this. But, importantly, the psalmist is still able to worship despite not having that answer. So verses 17 and 18 respond a little bit more. What the enemies put their hands to are destroyed, and they're corrupted. But what God puts his hand to is strengthened and uplifted. So the psalmist realizes that he can't overcome all the destruction and sorrow, but that God indeed can overcome the destruction and the sorrow. So he moves from despair to assurance. And assurance is even more than just being confident something will happen, but being guaranteed that something's going to happen. So even though things are incredibly hard, God is still worthy to be praised because he gives life. So this all culminates then in the last verse of the psalm, verse 19, which is a repetition from before, but with another tweak, another addition. So this time it's restore us, O Lord God of hosts. So they add Lord, and remember, Lord is in all caps. So that's his covenant name. So the psalmist uses this covenant name of God to remind himself of the many covenant blessings that God had promised to his people, and how they are definitely assured to come to pass, regardless of how things look now. So take a second and try to remember some of those covenant promises that God made with his people. So you can think of the covenant he made with Adam and Eve, the one he made with Noah, with Abraham, with Moses. All right, you can keep going. But think about some of those promises now. All right, so what does this mean for us? Well, first off, let's notice that the more the psalmist meditates on the bad things that are going on, his troubles, the bigger that those troubles seem to get. But also, at the same time, as he meditates on how good God is, God gets even bigger. God gets even more mighty and holier. So in times of sorrows, it's important for us to contemplate and to think about our circumstances, but it's also important for us to contemplate who God is. God is faithful, he's powerful, he's sovereign, and he's loving. And those things don't change just because our circumstances change. All right, so second, let's consider that verse 12 is never answered. Sometimes we'll never get an answer to the question why. Why did God cancel this school year? Why am I not going to see my friends for a long time? We might not ever get an actual answer. Sometimes we will, but sometimes we won't. But we can trust that God is in control even when things are hard, even when we can't figure out why he's doing what he does. And finally, the psalmist is going to recount how Israel was established and brought out of Egypt by God. And I think this is something that's really important for us to remember, and it's something for us to do, and it's hard for some of us to do it, but that is to remember the good things that God has done for us, God has done through us, God has done in our lives. So for me, it's hard. I really have to slow down and stop, put my phone somewhere, and ignore it, and think for a long time about how God has provided for me. Other people, they're constantly thinking about it, so they're able to come back to it quicker. But I would encourage you, and I think this psalm encourages us, to think about the good things God has done, and that will help sustain us through these bad times. So that's it. That's it for today. Like Dean said, I hope you guys have a good Easter. Sarah wishes you a happy Easter too, I'm sure. All right. So hopefully we'll see y'all soon. Be on the lookout for the Zoom calls. And that's it. See ya.